Welcome. This is IET Treasures Unlocking the Integrated Training and Education Design Toolkit. So we're glad to have you. We have been researching all that is in this toolkit. There's a lot here, and we're eager to share some of it with you and to have a couple of our colleagues who have been using the toolkit share their experiences with it as well. So thank you so much for being part of this. There is a lot of expertise here. So let's take a look at who's here. Brad, and I'll just let people come on camera and say hello as your name's called.
Hello, Brad Hasskamp, State Adult Education Director at the Minnesota Department of Education.
Thanks, Brad. Next up is Julie.
Good afternoon, everyone. And I'm Julie Dincau, Adult Basic Education Transition Specialist.
Thank you. And you've already met me. I'm Patsy. I direct Atlas over at Hamline University, and also with Atlas is Kristine.
Hi, I'm Kristine Kelly, and I am the Atlas Literacy Coordinator.
Thank you. And our fearless leader in Adult Career Pathways. Go ahead, Heather.
Hi, I'm Heather Turngren. I work as a consultant with Atlas, and I also am a teacher with Minneapolis Adult Education. Welcome, everyone.
And our two guests include Lynn.
Sorry, hi, I'm Lynn. I'm the program manager for the Hospitality Career Pathway at the International Institute.
Thank you, Lynn. And Dawne.
Good afternoon. I am Dawne Buttera with Workforce Development, Inc., and I am the Career Navigator for the Bridges to Healthcare program.
Wonderful. And we're so glad to hear from Lynn and Dawne a little bit later about their interactions with the toolkit and with their local IET work. So as you can see, this is a high priority for the state of Minnesota. Look at all the people who've come together to help put this out to you. So thank you for being here. I'm going to turn things over to Heather to go through some of the objectives for today.
Thank you, Patsy. And I like how you pointed out, we do have a high priority around IETs. And I want to just point out, IETs is not just one single person doing the work. It takes a team to put together this webinar, just as it does take a team to put together a great IET. So we hope by the end of today's webinar that you'll be able to identify the key components of the IET Design Toolkit. This is something that recently was released from Octa, and we would like to show you some of the first components of that toolkit. We'd like for you to be able to articulate the process for IET approval in Minnesota. Julie Dincau will be going through that process, and if you have questions, we do have time built into the webinar for that. We hope that you'll be able to describe that first phase of the IET Design Toolkit, and we have examples that Lynn and Dawne will be sharing with us that I think will give you a better idea about that first phase. And finally, we know a lot of people are requesting, where can I get resources? We like to think of Atlas as your one-stop shopping place that you can go to for a lot of these resources, and we'll show them to you. With that in mind, I'm going to give it up to Brad so that he can help explain some of these quick components for IET.
Thank you so much, Heather. And thanks to all of our Atlas partners and professional development folks for helping to host and organize today's session. As we get started, let's talk about IET and those components of an integrated education and training program or process. So let's go to the next slide and we can break down these three required components. So any IET program needs to combine adult education and literacy, workforce preparation, and workforce training. All three must be embedded in the program to count as an IET. You can see examples of adult education and literacy through, like obviously, adult education is a form of adult education. That shouldn't be surprising, but that also includes English language acquisition, English language and civics preparation. And a lot of these skills are embedded in the CCRS, or the College and Career Readiness Skills for Adult Education, one of our three sets of content standards in adult education. Next, with workforce preparation, this is thinking about critical thinking, digital literacy, self-management, and employability skills. And those are represented with the ACE's Transitions Integration Framework, or TIF, and our North Star digital literacy skills. And so that's and two of our other sets of content standards. So that makes up our workforce preparation section. And then the third component is workforce training. And these are really skills that are embedded and career or sector specific, occupational skills, on-the-job training, incumbent worker training, pre-apprenticeship. And these are really identified by the industry or the sector specific skills. So all three of those must be combined in order to count as an IET. Let's talk a little bit more on the next slide about some of these details. What else does it, in addition to those three things, those three components need to be offered concurrently and contextualized. And some of the ways that work, that you can make that happen, is by making sure that there is sufficient intensity and quality to the instruction. Making sure that each of those three pieces occur simultaneously, meaning that you're not doing just all adult education for a couple of weeks and then all workforce prep for a couple of weeks and then all workforce training the next couple of weeks. It should be more integrated and more simultaneous. It should be simultaneous. And with the instruction, you should be using occupationally relevant instructional materials. Another key component to IET is that you're required to have a single set of learning objectives that cut across all three components of your IET. And that is a big challenge, a single set of learning objectives. But that's really required in order to truly count as an IET. So let's go to So those are some of the key components. That's a very quick rundown. You can see if you go to the Atlas website, there's more in-depth trainings on what IET is. But at this point in time, we can take any questions you have just about those basic components of integrated education and training. Any questions that you have about the basic components or those basic criteria, feel free to add those in the chat. Heather, are there any other ways that people can raise any questions?
Well, we hope that people would be using the chat feature. And thanks, Brad. I know it was a very short introduction to those three key components. But Brad, you presented on this back in November at the fall virtual conference, and we had a webinar entitled IET 101, and it was a much more in-depth. I'd recommend folks, if they want to look a little bit more, they can be looking at that recorded webinar, and we'll share a link where you can find all of the recorded webinars. But the chat would be the best area. However, if someone wants to unmute and ask you a question, I think that could work as well, Brad. As long as you're here, if someone has a question about those key components for IET, right now would be the time to ask Brad.
So I did get one question in private chat, and that the question was, when you look at those three components, what is the difference between workforce prep and workforce training? So Heather, do you mind going back a couple slides so we can look at that and see those key differences? Thank you so much. So the workforce prep is that middle column or that middle green box. And that's really kind of thinking about those the transitions integration framework, or the TIF from ACEs, and the North Star skills. So think of these as employability skills. What skills do you need in order to be employable in any sector or setting? Critical thinking, digital literacy skills, self-management, those basic skills that kind of apply to any career and to other aspects of our lives. Then the workforce training are really the career or the industry or the sector specific skills. So if it were like a certified nursing assistant or CNA program, these would be more of those healthcare required skills and knowledge that you need in order to be a CNA. So this would be more sector specific or industry specific in that workforce training box, the one on the right hand side, or that third box. So the difference between the two, workforce prep are general employability skills and skills needed to be successful in work, in your careers. The workforce training are job-specific skills or sector-specific skills that one might need.
And thanks, Brad. You can see in the chat that's Ron thought it was a really great clarification. So thank you. And if anyone else would like to ask Brad some questions about this or more clarification, we have time right now, and I want to thank Patsy for chatting out the resource link to the IET 101 recording from the webinar we hosted in November. Great. I don't see anything coming through the chat, but we do have time built in for questions and answers to those great questions that you might have. And with that, I might turn this over to Julie Dincau, who can explain the process that programs can follow to become approved for offering IETs.
Thank you, Heather. I want to start off with telling people where they can find the actual form to fill out for approving an IET. And that's on this slide here. And it includes 3 different forms, actually, if you go to that link. There's a quick checklist. So many programs might think, you know, I'm looking at all these components that Brad just described, and I think I already have that running at our consortia or at our program. And if you want to just check to see, does this qualify as an IET, there's a quick checklist that you can just answer a few questions. And if it appears that you do, you can move on to the official IET approval form. And that comes with a set of directions that are very explanatory, so there shouldn't be a lot of questions about it. I would say the hardest portion for most programs to complete are what's entitled a single set of shared learning objectives. And I'm sure Patsy or Kristine, they presented on this at the Language and Lit Institute. So there's a session on that. But the actual form has to be submitted to our office. And it has to, preferably it's submitted before the program starts so that we can approve it. It has to meet all that criteria that Brad just described in order for it to be considered integrated education and training. And the reason we're asking for an approval form is because we at the state have to track this and turn in the information and report on it to our federal office. And so there is a way to track it in SID as well. But that's basically the approval form. There isn't, there's not a lot to it. And it's found on the website. Just try to get it filled out and completed before the IET begins. Are there any questions about that? And this is just a summary of what I just went to, what I just reiterated.
Thank you, Julie, and we'll give people a moment to see if they have any questions for you, but this is the process. Julie is the person to be talking to and asking questions about this IET approval process. And thank you for sharing the link to that SSLO session that Patsy and Kristine from Atlas led. It was a great approval. It was a great SSLO session, but I see that Ron has a question. What are the benefits of having an IET versus just ABE hours?
Great question, Ron. The benefit is that, well, right now, adult basic education is in a position where we really need to be showing that we have value to employers in the state of Minnesota in helping train individuals for careers in Minnesota. Employers are desperate for trained individuals. IET is doing that. Not only that, the research around IET is saying that students stay longer and are engaged in the coursework because there is a certificate or value added for them at the end of that training. Now, ABE hours in general are great too, and I think there's a place for that as well in our adult basic education programming. But IET overall has research that's backing it to say like this is the route to train individuals that are interested in training in adult basic education. And maybe, I don't know if Brad has anything to add to that. Feel free to add as well.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. So, and there is a little bit more about what is the value of IET. So I'm not going to step on anyone's toes in the next section here, but I will also say one other aspect of why IET versus just other adult education hours. We do track these IET outcomes separately. And so we're trying to gauge like, how does let's prove that IET does actually create better outcomes than a lot of our other adult education outcomes. And in a lot of our WIOA outcomes, you can see that on the NRS website. However, one other thing I would add is we just yesterday submitted a revision to our state plan to the that will be up for public review. And one of the changes that we made is we are planning to create an incentive account, or basically a financial incentive for IET hours, which would mean programs that have IET hours might get additional federal money for their adult education program, because we acknowledge that IET programming does require more partnerships, can be more expensive to run, but there is some value in doing that work contextually and contextually and simultaneously. So that's an incentive that we plan on adding in this next fiscal year.
Thanks, Brad. I'm sure a lot of people, once you have that little carrot in front of us for a little bit more funding in our ABE programs, I'm sure a lot of people will listen and pay a little bit more attention to IET. We know that there's been that federal push with the IET Design Toolkit coming out from Octa and such. So I feel that IETs are everywhere, and we need to make them happen here in Minnesota.
And I would just add to that, for those that are relatively new to the adult basic education field, IETs were just added as activity adult basic education can deliver in 2014. So that's kind of a short turnaround to get something up and implemented and running in our programs. And that's also one of the reasons we need to track it to see how we're doing. So thank you, Heather.
Thanks, Julie and Brad. I'll pause for a moment to give folks time to either unmute and ask a question to our representatives from MDE around IETs. If not, I think I want to thank Ron for prepping Kristine, who is going to let us know what are some of those benefits for offering an IET, or why would we go through all of this work, this approval process, bringing in all of those components. There is a great reason, and I think Kristine is the person to tell us.
Well, I think there's several great reasons, and I just have to say that I'm probably the newest to this work on this team here, but I am making gains, because when the question was asked about the difference between workforce preparation and workforce training, as Brad was talking, I thought, well, yeah, you know what? Because workforce preparation is this, and and I thought, oh my gosh, I have really come a long way. I still have a long way to go, but I just find this whole process really exciting, and the potential for our students. And there's a lot of value by offering IETs. And, you know, I hear this, and we hear this as the model of the future. And of course, we've been doing this work, or as Julie said, started since 2014. And it does take considerable time to really implement something like an initiative like this. But I think for me, one of the biggest opportunities I see is it gives students a sense of direction and moves them into sustainable wage employment. I'll talk a little bit more about the sense of direction, but just even in a conversation that Patsy and I had this morning with DOC about their new CTEC IET, and students are being hired, within a few weeks of getting their certifications and making some decent money. So that sounded great to me. And it also fulfills a need in our community, especially if you're looking at industries that really are in need of workers, particular industries. The process of creating these single set of learning objectives, it seems in the beginning like you're pulling a lot of pieces out, but it really clarifies what is being taught and how these 3 areas of CCRS, ACES, TIF, the industry or sector specific skills are being integrated. And it really helps to focus the lesson as in what vocabulary is really important, what language skills are needed so that students can learn that sector specific information. The student persistence, retention, and level gains, students do better when they feel like they have a clear goal. And what was that IET again? Sorry, I'm looking. That was the Department of Corrections. They do better when they have a goal. They persist more, and particularly when they when they're in programs that have beginnings and a clear ending, so that they can see that there's there's a journey, but that there is a definite endpoint. Which sometimes in regular programming, it's hard for us to give a student kind of an exact time that they're going to exit our programs. Programs using federal ABE funds for student training must be in an IET format, and questions about that definitely ask Brad and Julie, and they can talk more about that particular benefit. For students, it builds confidence and familiarity with industry-specific terminology. We know that a lot of vocabulary instruction, for example, in specific content areas or domain areas is very successfully taught when it's contextualized in an area. And language is used in real life situations. So that idea of language acquisition and retaining language is really a benefit. Getting like real life experience, being in the workplace, giving them an idea of what that job will actually be like. Again, that specific focused and a determined amount of time can really help with motivation. And it connects students, most importantly, to employment goals, to these careers, these job positions that have family sustaining wages. And to employers in the community, we have job seekers who are more prepared, who are going to be a good fit for these positions and well prepared. And employers in these partnerships have an opportunity to show why they're a good place to work and recruit employees. Employers trust our recommendations. And the IET model may assist employers if they're working towards increasing diversity, increasing equity, being more inclusive in their hiring. This can be a real benefit to employers in that way. And again, the idea of fulfilling employment gaps, whether it's healthcare or in the case, the CTech that I mentioned earlier, basically everything having to do cell phones, what we're doing right now, virtual, et cetera. There's an enormous need, and an IET like that can really help to fill that need. So all kinds of great benefits for everyone involved. It is work, but the benefits are quite big.
And thank you, Kristine. I think it's wonderful how you bring in the benefits, not just for the programs, but for our learners. And also think about our programs are in a community. We want to work with employers. Most of our students, as you know, Kristine, are here they might say, I want to learn English or I need my GED, but what is the purpose of learning English and obtaining that GED or high school equivalency? It's to move forward and get that sustainable job. So this IET format is one model to help adult learners move forward in their career. And thank you for all of those great rationales for offering IETs. I'd like to spend some time to talk about the IET Design Toolkit. So again, IET is integrated education and training. If those of you ever participated in our course design, program development design through Atlas as well as CCI, contextualized instruction, A lot of this information is the same, it's similar. What is different is there is a toolkit now that will help you design an IET. Patsy, myself, we had Dawne, Penny Yankee from Albert Lee, and Nancy Brower from I want to say Rochester or Mankato,
Faribault, I believe.
someplace a little bit further south than where I am in Minneapolis, participated in the IET Design Camp this fall. And we went through training on how to use the IET Design Toolkit to our advantage. We thought we would offer this webinar today to give you a taste of what is in that IET Design Toolkit. Faribault, thank you. I knew it was someplace a little bit further south. So this IET Design Toolkit came through an Octa Initiative. And Octa, for those of you who might not be familiar with all of the acronyms in adult basic education, is the Office of Technical, Career, and Adult Education. So it is the federal office that helps guide our local programming. And as you can see, this integrated education and design toolkit guides users through a team-based approach. Just like many of us are here guiding you through the IET approval process, an IET is a team-based approach. You've got to be working with your employers, with your programs, with folks in the workforce development area. And it is one solution or one model to address what our learners come to our programs for, what local businesses need, and we are all working together to provide that. We'll go through briefly the 4 phases or areas of this IET design, and we will be sharing the links to the toolkit. Thank you, Gail, for sharing that in the chat. It is linked to some areas within Atlas where we have more IET information. So again, that IET Design Toolkit, we went through that professional development along with 19 other states. So I believe through the spring IET Design Camp initiative put on by Octa, as well as the fall initiative, I believe now there are 38 states who have been using this IET Design Toolkit to inform their 8BE practices around their states. The IET Design Toolkit begins with this first phase. And before anything, you would do a self-assessment, what many of us do with our learners in the classroom. The first phase is the area of research and assess. So you've got to do a little bit of research before deciding what IET you want to use. Every phase of the IET Design Toolkit includes downloadable tools that come in the form of either a PDF or a Microsoft Word document that you can populate with your information. And it allows you an opportunity to reflect along the process that you are working towards creating that sustainable IET. Again, that first phase is research and assess. And we'll learn from Dawne and Lynn in just a few minutes on how they did research and assessment to decide which IET to offer and how to make it work within their programming. So it is the first phase. It's a strategic process. You need to do a little bit of background research to check for your local needs. You also have to check on the needs of your adult learners. And it helps you to recognize some key insights of what you might need to learn and identify to get those IETs that will be sustainable in your programming. So it's not just deciding, oh, I think I like underwater basket weaving for an IET. No, you've got to do some research to decide where are the career gaps in your local area? What are the needs? What are those sustainable wages and such? So you have a targeted approach at determining which IET to offer. The second phase, the one that I really like, is you're designing and planning. So you are working at that organized design process. You're identifying what your program goals are for that IET. You're also creating learner experiences that help address the needs that employers and businesses need, as well as your adult learners. I'm an educator at heart, and this is what I do every day, and this is the part that I really like. So I get to be thinking about that approach of making sure learners can follow through that whole IET process and come out at the end with either a living wage job or a certificate to move on to further training. The third phase of the IET design process is the develop and implement phase. And so this is when you are focused on those integrated curricula. You're bringing in, as Brad described, those realia, making sure students have a real experience. You're building contextualized instruction, and you're bringing in training materials. You're beginning to launch your IET program. You're going to be working with designing those single set of learning objectives where you're working with the employers to figure out what it is that they need to know and be able to do to have our learners go into their jobs and employment. The fourth phase is we always have to be evaluating. So it is a continuous improvement of our IET program. We are making improvements along the way. There could be changes in the workforce. I think we all have experienced that during this pandemic. There's been a multitude of changes, and our learners need to understand those changes and adapt to them, just as we have learned how to adapt to those changes in teaching. So it is a process for making sure that you have formal evaluations of your IET. And the downloadable tools within the toolkit have been very helpful for me as I went through the design camp. Just knowing what criteria to look for in evaluating how well your IET is moving along. So again, this IET Design Toolkit is free, it's open, it's available for anyone to use. And we thought this webinar would be a great way to launch your maybe initiative or your initiation to the IET Design Toolkit. As I mentioned, the first step we should all be taking is the self-assessment for an IET. Gail is sharing a PDF of that IET self-assessment, and you can think about it as we, meaning your program, your institution, but you just go through that self-assessment to see and to learn about what areas you should be thinking of while planning for that IET. It's just not your one class offered in your ABE program, but you've got to be bringing in around many other services that will support your learners, support your teachers, support the employers, and essentially support our workforce. So the results from that assessment that you take will direct you to which information in the IET Design Toolkit will be helpful to you. I found, again, the downloadable tools from the toolkit to be useful for me as I went through the design camp. That's a lot of talk from me, just talking about this IET Design Toolkit. What I'd like to do is see if you have any questions about the delivery model for IETs or the IET Design Toolkit. You could put your questions in the chat, or you could unmute and ask questions. I think so much of the information are right at your fingertips by just clicking the links that Gail has shared in the chat. But I am open to any questions. It's always that awkward pause, but when we are virtual, a little more time allows for people to be using their keyboards and chatting out questions. We do have time in our webinar today for more questions along the way, but I like us to think about our colleagues and how they are making IET work. Thank you, Ron. Is there a tool for how to assess your community needs? There is. Some of the toolkit tools give you ideas of where you can go to see what those community needs are. Some of it is going back to your workforce development boards, making sure that you are connecting to those boards and seeing what the needs are. So it's not just left to you as that individual teacher or you as the individual program manager to know all of the needs of your community, but there are ideas and resources available for you to reach out and get that support and those ideas. I'm
Heather,
hoping that helped answer your question.
Yeah, I can just add too in that section, this is Patsy, in that section in the toolkit of self-assessment, there's actually several key areas. And so one is specifically related to community resources. Once you have a chance to look through, you'll see some of those things in action. They're kind of between pages 15 and 24.
Thank you, Patsy.
Yeah.
All right. So someone says, is employer specific different than occupationally specific if the employer is a high need sector? Boy, that's a great question. And I am not sure if it's different. Occupation could just be that certificate that is needed. And the employer's specific could be what the employer is looking for. I'll just use the analogy right now that I think many school districts are experiencing. They need bus drivers. So yes, you might have that CDL license, but they might also, the school district might require other components than just having that certificate. They might want to make sure you have some of those employability skills that Brad was mentioning, making sure you can smile and greet the children as they come on and off the bus, making sure you can count in the number of folks that you're dropping off. So those would be some of the more employer specific versus that occupational specific. I'm hoping that helps address that question, and that is a great question. So if there are questions, feel free to bring them up, but I think we should hear it from the folks who have been doing the work. We are going to be learning from our colleagues around Minnesota, and we have some examples of how people have been using that phase one from the IET Design Toolkit, which is research and assess. First, we'll hear from Lynn from the International Institute of Minnesota. So Lynn, this is for you, and I'll just move the slide deck along.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Heather. Thank you everybody for being here today and allowing me to share about the hospitality career pathway at the International Institute and how we have used IET in our program. So a little bit about the hospitality career pathway. We have IET classes for housekeeping and for dietary aid. And our program started in 2013, so well before the design toolkit came out. But as you can see, the things that we did do in starting this program are reflected in that toolkit, and especially in this phase one of research and assess. So I do think that this phase is a crucial first step in evaluating what you have and to determine what you might need in order to have a successful IET. And I'm not going to read each of these things for the checklist, but what I do want to do is just walk you through what we did at the International Institute to kind of research and assess what would be a good career pathway, what would be a good IET for our program. And I know someone had mentioned having a one-room schoolhouse and how that how an IET could work in that. And I really think that the pathway approach to things is very helpful in that, and thinking about how can we help students at the very entry level, and maybe that's looking at vocabulary and just those basic employability skills, and then building on that from there. And so really scaffolding in all of those pieces. So what we want to do, oh, go back, we're not quite done with with the first one. Yep. So what we did in the housekeeping program is we looked at what we have already, and we already had a nursing assistant program that was very successful, and we saw housekeeping as a clear entry path into not only hospitality careers but also medical careers through environmental services. Hospitality also fit into our organization's mission and mission and vision. And we already had staff that could teach these fundamentals and didn't have to hire an industry expert in order to do that. So in this first phase of really building the foundation for your IET, you really want to think about what you already have and what are the pieces that you'll still need to get in order to make it a successful IET. All right, now we can move on to the next one. Thank you, Heather. So in looking at what are the IET policies and the local career pathway activities, you want to look at those WIOA guidelines, which were posted before, but that is, you really just want to look at what is going to be required for that IET, and Brad did a great job of kind of spelling that out earlier, and making sure that you are able to provide all of those pieces of instruction in your program. And just talk with people. Like, I think that that is the best thing. There's lots of people on this webinar and other people that we can connect you with who are doing IET already, and just run your ideas by them and say, do you think this will work? Am I on the right path? Am I on the right track? And I think that that is a good piece of the research and assessment that you can do, is just talking with other people who are already doing it. So you also want to look at the labor statistics, and there's a link here for the labor market statistics in the area, and you really want to look at if you've already decided and kind of assessed that this is the jobs that you want to train in and the employers that you want to target, see if that is a need in your area. Or do it the opposite way. Look at these labor market statistics and say, what are the in-demand jobs? And maybe we can provide training around that. For us, we saw that we're in a major metropolitan area. There are lots of hotels that are constantly needing jobs. And then we also saw that retention in housekeeping was incredibly low, probably around 30% back when we first started this program. And that we knew that the training and the dedication of our students would be an asset to the employers. And so that made it a really attractive avenue for us to go down. The wages in the housekeeping program were not, in housekeeping jobs were not great back in 2013, but they have slowly started to rise. And we also saw that there was upward mobility in the hospitality industry that led to higher wages. And that was a real asset to the program, and something that we wanted to take into consideration. So go on to the next slide. Yeah. So understanding the potential pool of adult learners. And this is really important to take into consideration, looking at the demographic data of your student population, and also the population of the adult learners in your community that you may be wanting to draw in to these training programs. For our student population, we knew that we were going to target women in the industry who were new to the US and who had low levels of English. So we knew that the job had to be entry level because we were working with students who did not have a lot of previous work experience and who had pretty low levels of education. And they also often needed to be employed right away. So we determined from that the training had to be short. We couldn't have a 3-month training because students were looking to get employed right away. And so that also fit into the hospitality direction that we were headed. And we also knew that many of them eventually wanted to get into healthcare, so the training needed to prepare them for that, and that medical career pathway that we had already established at the International Institute was really influential in that. So here we see that the importance of these data-driven decisions, and the data will also help you to make the case for your IET to funders, which we'll see in the next slide. But looking at the demographic data that you have on your current student population, and seeing what are the barriers that they have to employment, and how will this training help them to overcome those barriers. So this could be in way of just data that you're tracking on your students already, maybe in listening sessions with your students, surveys that are sent out to them, or talking with caseworkers that are working with these student populations already. There's lots of ways to gather this data. And of course, we talked about the funders. So our original supporter was the Women United, and they wanted to support women in the workforce. And so again, that was helped us to determine where we were going to focus our training. Now, of course, we're open to both male and female, and, but we still overwhelmingly have women in our program. And also looking at where our students are coming from. So in the beginning, the resettlement director at the International Institute was very highly involved and saw this need for women to be trained, because the men who were coming in and the families were often the ones who got the first job and were the main income, and that women were often left out of employment. And so we wanted to focus our training on something that would be accessible for the women and the families. And employers, looking at your employer partners, knowing that they will be willing to hire your graduates, and really working with them to get started in this training with the maybe they have identified a need that they need to train their current employees more and better, and you're able to step in and provide that for them. So there could be, you know, a variety of things that you have at the beginning. Maybe you have that employer partner and you need to develop the curriculum, or maybe you have the student population and you need to find the employers. So that's what this whole phase is all about, is trying to determine, again, what you have and what you still need to bring in. And then, of course, there also is the higher ed partners who, and this could be a different direction that you might want to go in, maybe developing a bridge class into higher education, and that maybe the college could do that reverse referral for you, where they are seeing students coming in not ready with certain skills and abilities to complete these college level classes. So they would send them back to you so that you can help prepare them and then can connect them back to the college. So that's just another avenue to have these IET classes in place, and another partner that's important to look at. Around the businesses and the employers, this is a very, very crucial part to consider. And again, you may already have an employer partner and they're like, we really need help training employees for this specific role. But you may not, and you may need to go out and look in the community for what employers are looking for and what their needs are. At the International Institute, we held some listening sessions with employers in the hospitality industry, and we did this as a large group gathering, which allowed for networking and sharing ideas within the industry. And the employers that we had at that time were very interested in doing that. And you may have a similar situation, but it could also be done individually with employers, and just sitting down and talking with HR people, hiring recruiters, all of those folks at the companies, talking to them, doing site visits, building relationships with employers. And this is just another critical step that will help you to build the curriculum in the future phases of the IET development. So establishing those relationships at the beginning is really helpful. It is also an ongoing process that continually allows us to update our curriculum and to make sure that we are meeting the needs of the employers in our community. All right, and then finally, don't recreate the wheel. Definitely, once you have an IET, the concepts can be translated into various other industries, and training partners are critical throughout the whole process. And making sure that you have that support and you are collaborating with all of them really takes the pressure off of the ABE partner, and making sure that everybody has a stake and a role in this. And you will find that then once everybody is kind of on board and has the same mission and vision, that you're able to help each other out along the way. Our training partners have been critical throughout the pandemic and have provided on-site training for us. For example, we're currently doing a hybrid dietary aid class, which is taught online, and then we do a week of in-person practical experience at the nursing home. And the hotels that we partner with were very helpful in offering us training space during the pandemic as well. And so as these relationships have developed, we just see that it has improved our training and also just really built trust with the employers, which is a net benefit for our students all the way around, because they're getting support from us as well as from the employers and other community partners. So I guess that was a lot, and I'd love to pause and hear what questions people have. I see all of the links chatted out there. Yeah, so what questions?
So thank you for that insightful presentation, Lynn. I know it's hard to put into just a few minutes everything that went into designing that IET, but as you were talking about that listening session with employers, it just made me think so often there is like the career fair where we put all of our learners into that employee place so that they can send out their resumes and such, and it seems like almost the opposite. We are saying, come on, employers, tell us what you want our learners to know and be able to do. How many employers did you have in that listening session? It sounded wonderful.
Yeah, and I would say, so the program did start in 2013. I did not come into the program until 2018. So I was not part of those listening sessions, but I believe there were probably 10 to 15 different hotels represented from the hospitality industry in those listening sessions.
Wonderful. And I want to thank Gail. She's chatted out a link to your hospitality career pathway information at International Institute, as well as that labor market statistics information that you use to help guide that IET. I'm wondering if anyone has a question for Lynn about the research and assessment phase for her IET. Please feel free to use the chat. You could also unmute. We're here to answer your important questions around this first phase of the IET Design Toolkit. And Lynn, when you said do not recreate the wheel, that's what we heard over and over again in the IET Design Camp, is if you're doing this alone, you are doing it wrong. You need partners. People have done this before. You just need to find where you can fit in and make use of those partners. Would you agree with that?
Definitely. Yeah. I think again, just talking things out with people who've done it before is really helpful, and they can direct you on the more specific pitfalls that maybe they experienced along the way. But every region is going to be so different, and every ABE provider is different. And so that's where just this assessment of looking at what do you already have, what are you good at, and building on that instead of trying to just do something completely new that you've never done before and you never have any experience in teaching or leading, right? There's no need to completely start from scratch. You already have the basic elements, and you just need to identify those in your program.
Great. And I'm looking at a comment Patsy said, and if you're doing it from scratch, you're probably doing it wrong. Build from others' curricula, perhaps found in the ACP library located at Atlas. Yes. And Ron has a question for you. How do you address employer partners competing for the same workers? Which I'm sure happens often, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they know that, they know that their competitors are out there and that they have to provide the best working place and wages and be competitive so that they can attract those workers. And so they're often competing for our students. They want to be the best ones out there. And so we often use it as incentive, and we can say, this employer, we really like your facility, but it's hard for us to recommend students to you because these other facilities are often offering $2 an hour more. And so it's a great way for us to share information and for employers to understand what it takes to really attract the best employees.
And it sounds like you're advocating on behalf of your learners as well, pointing them to a job which has a higher wage or perhaps more benefits. Lynn, I'm not sure if you're able to see in the chat, but Chelsea chatted out, is there a certificate attached to the housekeeping IET?
Right. There is no industry specific certificate offered through the housekeeping. But we do offer our own certificate, and we are able to be to recommend students to different employers, and they trust that recommendation.
Fantastic. You are all doing such great work and making sure students move along that IET pathway. I want to thank you for that. We'll move us forward unless anyone else has a question, but we do want to hear from what Dawne has to say about another pathway and her different approach because she's not doing the training in-house. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our second guest, who is Dawne Buttera. Dawne, if you're able to take it away, and I'll just move the slide deck forward.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So my name is Dawne Buttera. I work for Workforce Development as a career navigator for the Bridges to Healthcare program. Okay, so a little bit about Workforce Development. Workforce Development is in Southeast Minnesota. We have a number of offices, private, nonprofit agency, really dedicated to promoting career pathways and serving communities that we work with. So focus on those individuals and employers, removing barriers, creating living wage employment, providing services to connect individuals to resources, to employers, to get them trained and prepared. What I really like about workforce development is that each individual and industry is unique. And I really find that that's what we're looking at when we're building these IETs, is that we really have to keep in mind that each one of these programs is unique. So not only am I right now building this program in a very unique way with the team that we're working with for Bridges to Healthcare in Albert Lee, Austin, and Owatonna, but working with each of these individual clients as well that are going to be going through the program. So we really take our time to understand where all these players are at and how to work with that situation, and then really kind of integrate and create something hopefully that's beneficial to everybody. So a little bit about Bridges to Healthcare. This is the expansion into Albert Lea, Austin, and Owatonna. We are just getting going, so we are deep into creating an IET right now, using that toolkit, which has been very beneficial. So definitely still in it. So Bridges to Healthcare is a full service educational program for people interested in working in entry-level healthcare sector. So those specific programs we're looking at are the certified nursing assistant, medical assistant, and medical office professional. So we offer multiple levels of support coursework, and we target individuals primarily who have English language needs, or not much education history or employment history. Bridges to Healthcare originally started in Rochester 2012, has had tremendous success. They would use the word return on investment of 100+%. And so we're expanding that into Albert Lea, Austin, and Owatonna. Our first class starting in April of this year in Austin. So really excited about that. All right, a little bit about our team. So our team consists of the workforce development, which is myself and everybody else that I work with. Adult Education Center in Albert Lea, Austin, and Owatonna. And then Riverland Community College in Albert Lea, Austin, Owatonna. Mayo Clinic is also a partner, and we are building some other long-term care facilities into that partnership as well. So we have a lot of moving pieces, and a lot of different players and sites, and it takes a lot of community teamwork and collaboration. So, and again, like, you know, each one of these is different. I've done this work before in other ways where we've had everything in-house, and so, you know, depending on what you have to work with, it's your program structure is just going to be different. Okay, so about our program structure, you know, each client path is unique, right? And so our program path and program structure is going to be unique. So we have created a traditional and a non-traditional approach to our certification trainings. But in every path, our goal is really to remove barriers. So that is what we're really focused on. We first focused on building that non-traditional path, which right now looks like a 12-week program structure, beginning with those first 8 weeks at a local adult education center in one of those 3 communities, Albert Lea, Austin, or Owatonna, and taking a number of integrated classes with Riverland Community College. First one being that introduction to healthcare careers, introduction to medical terminology, first year experience, and North Star digital literacy. After students complete this 8 weeks and the certification completion of these classes, then they get to move on to that 4-week certified nursing assistant training at Riverland Community College. Right now we're rotating this program between the 3 communities. So how we've structured this, some of those barriers removed that I feel like are really going to make a big difference. Not only are they getting that 8-week preparation of that blended integrated learning from the college level in the ABE setting, but they don't need to have that GED or diploma to start that certified nursing assistant program at Riverland. So I feel like that's a really big barrier that's been removed. They don't need that application to Riverland, they don't need financial aid, and they don't need to take an AccuPlacer. So this is just a little example. I don't want to go too much into detail here, but just kind of how we've created this unique path for the client. So I'll just go ahead and talk briefly about the nursing assistant path over on the left-hand side. We've broken it up in traditional and non-traditional. Traditional is just the, you know, traditional application to Riverland, taking the AccuPlacer, applying for financial aid, and then, you know, registering for that CNA class. That is great. We have also done that reverse referral with Riverland. So those students that do traditionally enroll, that, you know, either want to take advantage of the Bridges benefits or maybe are not being successful in the traditional path, they can come back over to that non-traditional path at any time and really benefit from what Bridges has to offer. So that's that first part of the path. And then that non-traditional path is going to be just like what we said, it's going to have those prep courses, which will eventually lead to that certified nursing assistant class at Riverland. And then really prepping them for whatever path they decide to take after that, whether it's a job or, finishing their GED at the local adult education and then moving on to Riverland or moving on to advanced nursing in Riverland. The options are really unique. So I will move on to the next slide from here. Okay. Okay, so creating an IET doesn't happen all at once. And I feel like the more people I talk to, they feel like they have to have it done before they start. And it just doesn't work that way. So it is a process that happens in steps, and sometimes those steps include going backwards. And it really takes building a good team as the foundation. I'm going to say a little dose of miracle to do it well. And I'm going to use a little analogy moving forward. So like having a baby. We'll go to the next slide. So my part of this webinar is to really talk about the community focus, since that is where my position is at with WDI. I've been on the educator side as well, so I have some idea of all the pieces playing together, but community focus. So the Bridges to Healthcare grant is definitely a community-led project. WDI monitors the grant and is fiscally responsible for that grant. So I say we've kind of taken the lead as the quote midwife for this example. Because each program is unique, it takes a designated person to kind of understand and integrate all those pieces, keep everything together, and birth that baby safely into this world. So the navigator is the designated midwife. We'll go ahead and move forward with that. And a navigator can be a number of things. It doesn't need to be called a navigator. I know other people do this position, but I think it's really nice to have one particular person that has the ability to do it. They have the time, they have the funding, and that's just their job. So they're not pulled in a lot of other directions. So the navigator is like the glue, kind of holding everything together in the same way the midwife is the glue that holds, mind, body, spirit of mom and baby all the way through the phases of pregnancy. So at the center of our model over here, we have all of our players, our pieces. We have workforce development, local education, or the local adult education, Riverland community or industry partner, and then our employers. So why I think having the navigator is important for building an IET is really because of the consistent and focused role on the program and the goal. Otherwise, when other people have positions and other roles that they have to deal with, their energy gets scattered and it's just really hard to give it time. So it's a real gift to have a navigator and a program navigator that can do this. They can have the time to build the connections and to communicate, because I think that's extremely important in making it all work. Unfortunately, I don't think the phases of building an IET are as clear and defined as pregnancy and childbirth, and definitely not maybe in that same defined timeline. But in most circumstances, childbirth will be the outcome of pregnancy. It happens naturally, but it usually goes better if it's supported. So an IET is similar with like a navigator or a navigator-like position, supporting all the partners. The process is just going to be easier. So with phase one in mind, we are in gestation. And so as a community and a team, we've taken, taken into need the Albert Lee and the Austin and the Owatonna area, looking at our learner needs, how we're going to, do the structure of the program, what's going to work for 3 communities and 6 different sites. And it's a lot to juggle. So that program structure is going to be different for every IET and, every situation. Program goals, the IET policies, what's available for the local career training and industry certifications, our industry or employer needs. So the partners we're working with, what they need, how we're going to offer living wage employment potential, and then the resources we have available. So with all of that information, we let it all kind of gestate, right, and integrate. And it's a lot of conversations and it's a lot of sorting out. And we begin those conversations with our partners of how are we going to put this into action? And this is where I feel like the navigator is a real critical piece in building that relationship, collecting information, and really keeping everybody in, some kind of alignment and focus. And again, it's really just because they have the time. So through communication and the focus on the outcome of the SSLO, the quote delivery process can begin. So the navigator can keep that critical piece, is a critical piece in keeping everyone focused. Again, because it's their job, they have the time to do it. So when we have that process in place to ensure all needs are met, we are ready for delivery. And once that IET is delivered, this is just the beginning, right? There's constant communication, what works, what doesn't work, things change, and we just have to be willing to go ahead and change what doesn't work and keep what does work, but keep the conversations and that evaluation going. Okay, so what I have learned as a navigator is to start with the end result. Figure out what we want to do for what you want to build as an end result based on what your partner and community needs are. To get here, it's asking a lot of questions to understand. Building good relationships with all partners, extremely important, and focusing on the why for all partners. Why the partners that are involved, why do they want to be involved? What do they need to get out of it? And then putting all those things together. Simplifying what you learn, communicate to the partners only what they need to know. So not giving too much information and putting it all together, and then still knowing that it probably will change. And with that, I have finished, and I am open to any questions.
Thank you so much, Lynn. Excuse me, Dawne, you have so much
Yeah.
to share about your role as a navigator and doing what you do. I liked how you said that navigator position, that person has the time and can really help the ABE managers and all of the other partners who have so many things on their plate, right?
Yep.
That you have that time that you can really make this IET happen. I'm not sure if you saw the note that Laura put in the chat, but she thought it was a huge barrier that you removed by having learners not have that GED or that AccuPlacer score or even that application process. I'm wondering, my great question for you would be, how did you get that barrier removed? Because that is really, I think, a barrier for many of our learners.
Yeah. I felt that the same way, that it was a huge barrier. And since our training partner was at a college, that was their requirement. And it's not a certification requirement. So someone in the state of Minnesota can work as a CNA without a GED or a diploma. And so I felt those things were just kind of contradictory, and started a conversation of you just possibly removing that, at least for this bridging of this program. So it's just a conversation.
And that was something that you initiated and you started, and then you helped remove that barrier that perhaps the ABE manager didn't have time to get that conversation and relationship going.
Right. And to stay consistent with it, because what I've really found is, and it's no fault on anyone. I think we all get busy. We all get programmed into what we do for positions and jobs and things like that. And when you don't have someone that's kind of like anchoring in a change, it's really easy to lose focus on a change and go back to doing things a certain way. And so it's just kind of a constant reminder of like, hey, what about this? Hey, what about this? What about removing that GED requirement? And then it's that little bit of, kind of tightening that anchor, every conversation, that I think helps get it done from my experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. That is wonderful that you were able to do that. I'm looking in the chat to see if anyone else has a great question. I see Laura here says that's one of the issues regarding the Free State CNA program. that started in January. When I looked into it for my students, they were required to have a high school diploma or GED, and that eliminated most of my students' ability to pursue that program. I'm
And
not sure if
Laura,
that's
I'm
quite
not,
a,
yeah, Laura, I'm familiar with that as well. And I'm not sure if your training partner would be also be the college, but I'm guessing that may be the same thing. And so when I'm familiar with Riverland's, the program that they offered through the state, and those are separate classes. So they would offer the state-sponsored training program, which also required that GED. So that the Bridges program is a little bit different in that way. One thing that may, sorry, Heather, like one thing that may be a good thing to check out too. I know Riverland has offered, and I know others, I think South Central offers a customized training path, and I'm not sure what that would look like of where you're at, but it may be waived for that customized training.
Yeah,
Well,
I'm in
go ahead.
Columbia Heights, and I know Kathleen is here. She so it was just because it was free, and this was part of this, you know, Governor Walz in his new plan to get people, what was it, like 1,000 new CNA certified CNAs. I thought, gosh, this would be a great opportunity for some of my students who I know are interested in becoming CNAs. But then when I did see, you know, I looked at all of the different locations that would be reasonable for my students to potentially attend, and they all required the high school diploma. So I don't know if we could partner with like Anoka Hennepin or one of the community colleges to see if they'd be willing to work with us on that. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if Kathleen has any thoughts on that, or I know she's here.
And Laura, that's a great idea.
I could follow up with you, Laura, about that individually. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
And perhaps pointing to this Bridges to Healthcare program that's operating at an M-State facility, that maybe it could be a model used in other areas. What do you think, Dawne? Could that be a possibility?
I would love that. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Bring it all across the state. You could be everyone's navigator.
And Laura, feel free to reach out for if you have any other questions too. I had worked at a program in St. Paul. And so if you have any other questions about that, I'd be happy to share that too.
Yeah, well, like I said, maybe Kathleen and I can chat about it. We have a pre-CNA class that's offered at our site. But like I said, I teach some of the higher level students who are interested in getting their CNA, but we end up losing them. They'll go to like Summit or something like that to get that, and then come back to us potentially. But it'd be awesome if we, it'd be awesome if we could have something like that available at our program.
Yeah, that's the full IET. You're doing that adult education, you're doing the workforce preparation, and then you're getting that workplace skills in there, Laura. That would be great. Thanks for chatting out Dawn's email address. So she did give us permission to share it. So thank you. I'm going to move us forward, Dawn, unless there's any other questions or you want to say one last piece, but thank you for providing so much information.
Absolutely. Thank you.
We'll move us forward. So I'm so grateful to have such knowledgeable people joining us on these webinars, Lynn and Dawne. But we also would like to share some resources with you that are available for you if you're deciding to start an IET. I keep saying go to Atlas, but that's because Atlas really is a great resource, not only for those of us in Minnesota, but nationwide. During that IET design camp that I went through, I had so many other folks in different states around the United States reach out to me because I mentioned our wonderful resource of Atlas ABE. So if you go to the Atlas website, and Gail put that into the chat, you can then click on resources and you'll go to the Adult Career Pathways resource. Once you're at that link, you want to look on the right side. There's going to be a lot of different areas, but look for the Integrated Education and Training, or IET. And within that link, you will see the IET Design Toolkit, as well as other articles and such on IET. So we've tried to put it all right there available, I always say, at your fingertips. For those of you who are new to IET and Adult Career Pathways, I'd like to invite you to join our ACP, or Adult Career Pathways networking group. It is located in the Mighty Networks, which is a free group that you can be using for networking within adult basic education. There's many other groups to join, but I'd like to have you join the one for Adult Career Pathways. We no longer use the Schoology group, so all of the links I share is in Mighty Networks. Gail can send out a link for how to access the Mighty Networks. It is a free account, and then you just have to adjust your notifications and then just join the Adult Career Pathways. And I try to post information related to Adult Career Pathways, and lately everything I've been posting is IET. Those are, I think, the letters we'll hear a lot about in the future. So speaking of the future, I'd like to have Patsy talk about where you can go and watch recordings in your future.
Well, thank you. And we have Kristine Kelly to thank for this particular slide. So thank you to her. I'm just going to post the information about Mighty Networks that was on the previous slide here so that people can easily find it. Yeah, I've already posted a couple of direct links to IET specific webinars that we've done recently. There's lots of stuff there, but you might be most interested in the IET 101 from the November conference, and then also what we did just last week, which was the SSLO, we called it the road trip, and thinking about what it is you need to do to get a successful road trip completed with minimal tension. So that was just last week, and that has also been posted. And we'll drop a link to the YouTube channel shortly. And there's a lot of other Adult Career Pathway things in that playlist as well. So if you've missed things, you can go back. If you have finished Netflix, now you can just start binging webinars. So enjoy. And a couple of other things to note. We wish we could see you all in person, but we do not feel like it is quite the time to do that safely. So we are going to hold a virtual conference on April 22nd. It's a Friday, and that will be kind of like we did last spring with an unregional for the entire state. And it's a full day of workshops right here on Zoom. And then specifically to integrated education and training, so anyone here really should have this on your radar. On April 28th, we're going to do an afternoon, so a half-day afternoon institute of concurrent sessions and some general information and guidance around integrated education and training. So mark those 2 dates in April and plan to join us. Heather?
Well, we ended just a few minutes early, and I think that is all right, and we can sit around, wait here in case any of you come up with some great questions, but we're also just an email away. Feel free to email anyone who presented at this webinar. I can take emails as well as Dawne. I believe Lynn would answer some emails. I want to thank Dawne for presenting and Lynn for presenting again. She has such a wealth of knowledge. And thank you, Brad and Julie, for giving us a little bit of MDE lens on why IETs are important. Otherwise, I think we might be ending 5 minutes early.
It's an IET miracle. Thank you, Heather. I want to shout out to Heather too for always keeping us on track and wrangling all these wonderful presenters. So thank you, and thanks to Kristine for giving that rationale earlier as well. We'll go ahead and stop the recording.